Hello folks, we're talking about population growth in this video. It's video number 2 for unit number 2. So you should take a moment and make sure that you set up your notes to look like these here. We're going to talk about contemporary and historical trends in population growth and decline. So the first thing we're going to talk about is how do we calculate population growth? And the first measure that we'll discuss is the natural increase rate, sometimes referred to as natural rate of increase. And this is the percentage by which a population grows within a year. And so here is the equation of how you find it. So you're going to find the natural increase rate by taking the crude birth rate minus the crude death rate and then dividing that by 10. So let's take a second and see if you can do it on your own. So if the crude birth rate of the world is 20 and the crude death rate is 8, take a second and see if you can find the natural increase rate. So I'm going to give you a second. You should have gotten a natural increase rate of 1.2. So that's how you find it. However, the natural increase rate does look very different at different scales, right? So we just did the world natural increase rate. But as you can see, as we look here on this world map, you can see that regions in sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and Southeast and Central Asia have pretty high rates of that natural increase rate, whereas places like Europe have very, very low rates. So it's important to think about scale and remember that population growth is mostly happening in those least developed countries. Okay, the next measure that we're going to use is doubling time. This is the number of years needed to double a population. And this assumes a constant natural increase rate. It's part of the equation, right? And so a doubling time is found by dividing 70 by the natural increase rate. And so again, let's try this out on your own. If the world's natural increase rate is 1.2%, when or how long would it take for the world's population to double? So take a second to plug that 1.2% into that equation and see if you get the answer. So I'll give you a second to find that answer. And you should have gotten about 58 years. So it's going to take about 58 years for our world population to double if our natural increase rate stays the exact same. And so again, scale matters, right? So population doubling times by region can be found here. And you can see that the doubling time in years for Europe is much, much, much longer than the doubling time for Africa. And this is because they have different rates of natural increase. Okay, the last kind of equation we're going to use here is total population growth equation. So migration plays a part in the overall growth or decline of a country's population. And so we always have to take into account immigrants and immigrants. So immigrants, starting with an I, is people who are moving into a country. I means into. However, immigrants, starting with an E, is out migration, people that are moving out of a country. And so our equation here for total population growth is going to be your births minus your deaths plus your immigrants minus your emigrants. Okay, and so again, this is another way of measuring population growth that takes into account migration, whereas the other two do not. Okay, so even though we just discussed those three equations, there are other measures that are included when demographers look at population growth. And we call this alphabet soup because of all of these abbreviations. I'm going to go through these really quickly, but I've grouped them as fertility, mortality, and other. So fertility measures are crude birth rate. You know that that's the total number of live births per 1,000 people in a year. And the total fertility rate is TFR. This is the average number of children born to a woman during her childbearing years. It is very, very important for you to know that the total fertility rate that is considered replacement level is 2.1. So just kind of write that down and keep that in your mind for now. Our mortality measures are crude death rate, so total number of deaths per 100 people in a year. Infant mortality rate is the second one there. This is the number of deaths in the first year of life per 1,000 live births. So children who die before their first birthday. The child mortality rate, however, is the total number of children who die between the ages of 1 and 5 for every 1,000 children born. So infant mortality rate is first year of life. Child mortality rate covers 1 through 5. And then lastly is maternal mortality rate. This is the total number of female deaths per 100,000. So this is different. It's 100,000 live births. And this is from any cause related to or caused by pregnancy or childbirth. Lastly, we have these other measures down here. Life expectancy is the average number of years an individual can be expected to live. And then zero population growth is a demographic balance where we see the population neither growing or declining. So I just wanted to cover some of these population growth measures with you guys before you moved on and learned more about population. Okay, so the history of population growth. This graph is very important for you to be familiar with, and I'm going to walk you through it here. So throughout most of human history, there was very little population growth. You can see the line stays very close to the bottom, right? And by 1 AD, which is about 2,000 years ago, the world's population was about 250 to 300 million people. We're going to call it 300 just for the sake of things now. So the doubling time was about 1,650 years, right? So by the time that we get to 1650, our population would double and reach about 500 million. Okay, and the doubling time after that was about 170 years, right? So we see the population in 1820 reaching its very first billion. So doubling time from 1820 would be about 100 years. About, roundabout, it's not perfect. So in 1930, we see our population reach its second billion. Then our doubling time decreases drastically. And you can see that it was decreasing each time, each billion that we hit, right? But it decreases drastically between 1930. And so in about 45 years, 1970 to 1975, our population kind of explodes to 3 billion. Right? And so this is what's referred to as the J curve. It looks like a J, and it's important that you know that. Doubling time is drastically decreasing, and so we see a very high natural increase rate. So one big impact of this, and here's another way of looking at that J curve in the data that I just explained to you, is the Industrial Revolution. Remember, the Industrial Revolution starts about here in Great Britain, so about 1750. And so this is when we see an unprecedented level of wealth, we see medical and technological advancements, surpluses of food, and high rates of urbanization, right? And this really impacts that change in the doubling time and then our drastic increase in population. So again, make sure that you know that this is a J curve and you know that our doubling time is shortening and shortening and shortening. If the world stays how it is right this second, experts predict our doubling time is about 55 years. So by about 2030, they think that we might hit about 8 billion. So what are some reasons why population grows and declines? So I'm going to explain this to you in terms of ESPN. And what I mean by that is I'm going to talk to you about economic, social and cultural, political, and then natural or environmental reasons why population grows or declines to kind of help you try to categorize them. So it might help if you set up your notes like this and label, E, S, UPN to kind of organize these together. So economic first. Let's talk about why does population grow economically? Mostly because of poverty. Okay, when people are living in poverty, they are mostly farming for themselves and to feed their families rather than gaining surplus and selling that, right? And on the farm, you need more children to work your land, right? So a lot of times, impoverished countries see children as almost a part of the workforce for their subsistence farming. Okay, socially and culturally, religion is a huge issue in population growth. And this is because some religions do not believe in birth control or family planning. So Islam, Christianity, and Hinduism are three of the big ones that do not believe in that. And then I'm also going to talk about kind of a middle ground here between economic and social is access to health care. Okay, so medical advances actually, and more access to healthcare lowers our crude death rate, right? And it does this because we see women having prenatal care, so babies are more likely to be born, and we also see improved vaccinations and treatments for diseases, right? So both of these contribute to increased life expectancy. So access to healthcare and medical advances actually help grow our population. Politically, pro-natalist population policies, and we'll talk more about this, but an example is in Hitler's Germany, women used to be rewarded for the amount of children that they had. So you can see here that they received crosses for however many children they could produce, and there was a lot of propaganda encouraging women to be mothers and to have as many children as possible. And then lastly, environmentally, how does population grow? Well, if you have a successful agricultural society, then you see a food surplus, and with more food, you can feed more people, and you can focus on nutrition of your people as well. So these are the reasons why population grows. Let's talk about why population declines. So economically, prosperity leads to urbanization, and these things allow the economy to focus more on education as well as healthcare, right? So assuring that people in their country are educated and have access to doctors. And so another reason why population might decline is an economic downturn as well, right? So think about it. Babies are expensive. So if a country is in the middle of a depression, they may see lower crude birth rates. But let's talk about socially. When women are active in the workforce and they are educated, then we see crude birth rates decline drastically. So we need women to be in control economically, and we also need women to seek out family planning, right? If women understand reproduction and they also can gain contraception of some kind, then we see the crude birth rate drop as well. And lastly, with improved healthcare, we also see infant mortality rate, child mortality rate, and maternal mortality rate decline. So with more children surviving, they try to limit their amount of pregnancies in children. So politically, anti-natalist population policies, you can see here, this one says the more you have, the less they get. 2 is enough, encouraging their citizens to not have more than 2 children. And then you can see here this example of propaganda from India, big family, problems are in the way, small family, happiness all the way. Also politically, if there's turmoil or war in a country, obviously we're going to see high crude death rates that is going to result in population decline. Lastly, let's talk about environmentally. So natural hazards and disasters are going to result in population decline. Think about things like earthquakes, tsunamis, hurricanes, flooding, blizzards, or droughts. And then also famine, right? So if agriculture is not being productive and a country cannot feed its citizens, then we're going to see a population decline as well.